I think for the boys, it is masculinity has depth to it, and to not be afraid to explore the depth of it with me or their friends or anyone. Within that, I mean, there's a huge core value of how you interact with and treat women is a really big deal to me. I mean, there's a few core principles that are almost non-negotiables in the way that they navigate relationships while they're under my roof, in the sense of you're not going to take advantage of or manipulate or and it's not like in a threatening way. It's like that's not who you are. You actually have a good heart. You are a compassionate man, that kind of stuff. And then I think the other thing is just a willingness to, which has been a challenge for me, but has also been really healing for me when I've chosen to, is to reach out. I think men in general have a harder time than not to ask for help, to choose to be vulnerable with a trusted core, not with everyone, but that it's going to be messy, it's going to be hard, but if you choose to live honestly with yourself and with others, there's a depth there that you should be willing to lean into and explore as you grow older and as you navigate the different stages of life.
You are listening to DadicatedJoe, the new dad's guide on the upending and transformational experience of becoming a father. Today we have my dear friend Josh Cearbaugh. He is the host of the Multifaceted Masculinity Podcast. He's had quite the journey. He thought he wouldn't even make it to age 30, let alone become a father, and then his first son was born, which shifted everything. He made it to 30 and now has been divorced, remarried, and has 3 biological children and 2 stepchildren ages 7 through 16. So he walks us through his issues with addiction, divorce, the chaos of blended families, and I just love that his story isn't polished. It's super raw, and it's about stumbling, getting back up, and learning how to model masculinity that's both strong and vulnerable. In our conversation, we wrestle with the real stuff like how to navigate divorce with kids, what he would do differently if he could, how to be vulnerable without losing strength. And he just really shows us how healthy masculinity can be modeled for our sons and daughters in that hard but beautiful work of earning trust as a stepdad in a blended family. Josh Cearbaugh, friend and colleague of mine, we met because his wife, though they weren't married at the time, worked for Serenity Kids, was actually one of our very first employees ever at Serenity Kids, and kind of jack of all trades marketing support. And saw her through her divorce and then her courtship with this upgrade guy, and got to go to their wedding and just been a part of their lives and their kids' lives. They combined families with, she had 2 kids and he had 2 kids. So they've got this interesting combined family here. And now he's doing similar work as me with a great podcast on multifaceted masculinity. So great to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Joe. We've had many
for
conversations, but now it's being recorded, so.
That's right. So yeah, I always like to start with, why become a dad? Why'd you want to become a dad?
I never thought I would be, to be totally honest. I never thought that I would live to see 30, and I lived life that way. Joined the Marines, just lived life on the edge in a lot of ways, a lot of dumb ways. My mom used to say that that her guardian angels were always often working overtime for me, and I believe that. And so it really wasn't on my radar. And then I was arrogant enough to, when I was open to having kids, I used to jokingly say, but also kind of feel, oh, well, my wife can raise them for the first 6 or 7 years, and then I'll take over, because I don't do diapers and like crying babies, and I just don't do that stuff, Little did I know, right? When it came time with my ex to have that conversation and be serious about it. I mean, I'm somewhat of a sarcastic guy, I joke, etc., but there's a little bit of truth in a lot of jokes that we share. When it came time to have that conversation of, hey, do you want to have kids? There was a resounding yes in my heart, because I don't know of a richer expression of love than creating a life out of that love that you have with someone else. And it was not on my radar, all of both the benefits and the challenges that I would have in being a dad. that wasn't necessarily the driving factor of being a dad until I had my first son. I actually have 3 kids, so we've got 5 in the Brady Bunch together. Yeah,
Oh
2
my
boys and
gosh.
a girl, and then, Kristen, my wife, has 2 girls. So we collectively have 3 girls, 2 boys. But when my first son was born, it changed everything for me. I had already met my ex-wife in Africa on kind of a spiritual journey, and so there was already a spiritual component to who I was, but seeing that life, seeing it just kind of all culminated in that moment, and it was intense. We planned on having a home birth, and so the first 24 hours of labor was at home, and then we had to transition to the hospital, and so there were challenges there, but when he actually came out, um, there was a part of me that I did not know that I had that I began to access. And then you have the challenges of the baby, first 6 months to a year, and you don't know what you're doing, etc. And then you reach this point where it's like, I think I want another one. I want to experience that even deeper level. And we had 2 boys, and then my daughter was born after that, and then that opened up a whole new channel of things because I grew up with 3 brothers and no sisters, and so it's not been kind of this deep-seated, "I really wanna be a dad," until I was a dad, and now out of anything that I've done in my life, by far the most challenging, but also the most rewarding and life-giving thing that I've ever done is be a dad.
What did it open up in you? What was that? What did you discover?
It's like I found hidden lock rooms in my heart that all of a sudden I had access to that I didn't before. And to be honest, it's such a supernatural, powerful thing to be able to create life that in that moment, it was like nothing else mattered except for that little human being that was helpless and powerless. And like I said, then there's the challenges as you get into it with the lack of sleep and then the arguing. And then as they grow, they trigger you. Like there's all of that. All of that's there. And sometimes that feels overwhelming in the moment, but the trade-off, it's just like anything that's challenging, right? Like going to the gym sometimes isn't easy, but what you gain from it is so worth it. Take that and multiply it by 1 billion, and that's what you get from being a dad.
Yeah. And then, similarly, how did you come to start doing masculinity work and this multifaceted masculinity platform? Like, where did that come from?
Yeah, I mean, that came out of my own pain, to be honest. I have said I grew up with a there but not there dad. So most of my memories were of him on the couch watching TV. I have distinct memories of just wanting him to help me fix my bicycle when I was 9 or 10, and he just wouldn't. And so I was out there trying to figure out how to put the chain back on and do all of that. And so I went from that kind of being my environment. Now, my dad has told me that he never once heard the words, "I love you," from his dad. He was a drill instructor during Vietnam. So if you just kind of picture what that reality would be. And so my dad actually made progress in what his environment was, but he didn't know how to teach me how to be a man. He was stuck in his own victim mentality of these things have happened to me. His escape was oftentimes, looked like depression, not being able to hold down a job, just watching TV most of the time, that kind of stuff. Even when we would go camping, he would just be laying in the hammock, and then me and my brothers would go off and explore or go for a walk with my mom, that kind of stuff. And so really, I went from that environment where I talked about growing up, we didn't talk about 3 things. There were no fly zones: sex, money, and emotions. You just didn't go there, which are kind of 3 big things when it comes to life, right? And so a lot of my own journey going straight from that to then joining the Marines, where especially the emotional part, there's a distorted, pursue women, sleep around, all of that. And then the emotions, well, emotions are essentially weakness. And then it's taking me, I got out in 2004, and really it's been, ever since then, it's been a journey of learning how to be a man, learning how to model masculinity to my boys in a healthy way. And a lot of that has come from doing my own personal work, but then still not wanting to be at this place of, oh, well, I've arrived and I have all the answers when it comes to masculinity. I always want to be learning. I always want to be evolving. And I want to model that to my children, not just to my boys, but to my kids, that I don't just settle and be stagnant. I have my challenges. I've struggled with depression, especially when I got divorced. I was suicidal for a period of time. Like, I'm not saying that I've just been on this perfect upward trajectory for the last 20 years, but a lot of the driving force of my podcast has been selfishly, I want to have conversations with people that are either further down the road or have explored something in the realm of masculinity that I either haven't yet or I've experienced a little bit and have an understanding, but I want to extract that wisdom. And even to this day, my dad, I mean, he says, I love you to me. We do talk on the phone sometimes, but it's normally, hey, I bought these tools and this is the weather today. And we don't really have a depth in our connection. And I've come to be okay with that and not look to him to model that to me. And so a lot of my journey has been learning how to do it through trial and error on my own by making huge mistakes sometimes, but then also learning from those that I admire or I respect or I look up to. And you can do that through reading books. You can do that through a lot of different channels. For me, one, I'm a verbal processor, so I love talking things out or concepts out with people. And two, I want to learn from people who have carved a path before me in what I see is kind of a healthier way of either modeling masculinity or presenting that to my kids in a healthier way. And so oftentimes when I have guests on my podcast, I'm challenged by the conversations and I'm honest about that. And I selfishly love that for me. And then the feedback that I've gotten from people that have listened to the podcast is that they glean from it as well. And so in a sense, the areas that has been my pain has also been the tool that's helped equip both myself as well as others just through the avenue of the podcast or the coaching that I have connected to it.
How did you come to that, having had this repressed childhood, coming out of the Marines, awakened you to, oh, there's a new way to be a man?
I crashed and burned. With my ex-wife, I had started a company with her dad, and we did kind of a building phase for almost a year and then really aggressively launched it. And after about 6 months of it being open, the numbers just weren't there. The math wasn't there. But her dad, he has a lot of great attributes, but he is a disciplined no matter what, at any cost, work 100 hours, self-made millionaire individual. And so I went from having a dad that wasn't present to having a dad that was quote unquote successful and then also trusted me with business. And so I went hard in the paint right alongside him and just worked and worked and worked and worked and worked. But I wasn't aware of what I was doing to my inner world because I'm a Marine. I can push through. I can get 4 hours of sleep if I have to because the baby's waking me up and, or whatever. And then I was exposed to porn when I was about 12 years old through a magazine. And that became somewhat of my coping mechanism, which led to a variety of obvious problems. And the tipping point was really when that business, we did the numbers and it was like, okay, this is not going to work. We have to shut this down. Well, I had used a lot of our savings to live off of, in a sense, to pursue this. And so here we were I had our newborn we had a newborn, which was my second son, and then my other son. So we were in the throes of those like early stages of parenting. And I had been neglecting my connection with my wife. I'd been neglecting myself for the sake of work and then turning to really primarily alcohol and pornography to manage this overwhelmed state that I basically had learned to operate in, not really thrive in, but like function in. So when that business shut down, it pulled the cork on that high pressure intensity that I had been in for so long. And through a series of really hard conversations, came clean to my wife at the time. And really that began the journey of, I joined a men's group and that started peeling back the layers of like, hey, what happens internally if you stop looking at porn and stop drinking alcohol? And I'm like, oh, I can do that. I'm a Marine. I can do that, right? I can do anything. You do that and all of a sudden it's like taking the lid off of all this stuff I had capped. And at the same time, started meeting weekly with an individual that was really good at hearing me talk up here at the surface and then going, yeah, but what about down here? And making me slow down enough to feel, which terrified me. But I knew that I needed it because what I was doing wasn't working. I wasn't feeling fulfilled. I was feeling burnt out. I was feeling empty. And so it was really kind of those two things in conjunction with one another. And we were part of a church community as well that I was involved in. And so there was just kind of this synergy of meeting regularly with somebody who I trusted and let them, I chose to be exposed in front of them emotionally, being a part of a men's group that kind of had an AA model-esque to it. The founder was a part of AA, and so there was a lot of similarities in there, but he'd kind of morphed it off and spun it off into his own form of a men's group, centered mostly around purity. And then being a part of this church community, that really accelerated the transition out of where I was. And then by what I was doing within the church, I realized I have both a passion and a gift for helping men do essentially what I walked through with the person that I trusted. I found myself loving helping others do that as well. And that's really what kind of started the coaching career about 11 years ago or so. So that's kind of the short answer.
How did your wife at the time respond to all that?
It was messy. She was super hurt. She had her own triggers and trauma and issues that were also a part of that, just this deep-seated fear of rejection and different things like that. And that's not at all an out for anything that I did or said or the way that I treated her. But it was really messy because here we were, fairly new parents, and I had turned to these addictions to manage my overwhelm. We weren't in a good financial position, and it was good because we were having honest conversations. I was no longer hiding. She was no longer feeling as hurt, but there was also it wasn't a light switch, right? It was a process of several honest conversations and hard conversations, and times that I would mess up and times that she would react. And meanwhile, just super practically, especially for her, because she was the one breastfeeding, not sleeping well, and lack of sleep shortens your fuse with one another, and learning how to manage all of that. But we felt like we were in it together instead of kind of these two divided units, because we weren't fully on the same page for obvious reasons of everything that I said. And then as I began to move more into the work, then she became one of my greatest champions, and still is to this day. We're divorced, but we have a good co-parenting relationship, and I love her. She loves me. It looks different. I'm remarried, obviously, but she still believes in me and is willing to refer people to me, and all of that, and vice versa. And so it went from me hiding from my own strengths and from her in that, to when that journey began, now that she saw me more for who I was, not for who I was presenting, then she became a champion of that version of me that I was trying to pursue.
And this is happening in the wake of kind of financial collapse, a newborn with a toddler. Yeah. And then somewhere in there, you decide to have a third kid?
Yeah, we're a little crazy. Set aside the fact that in the first few years of our marriage, we moved from Florida, where her family was, up to Pennsylvania, back down to Florida, out to California, and then ended up ultimately down here in Texas. And so we both, I think to a degree, we both had somewhat chaotic environments, and we recreated that in our marriage, which was one of many ingredients why, unfortunately, it didn't work out. Yeah, and all of them, I can't say that any of them were a surprise or unplanned. We intended to have all of them. And I think that there's wisdom in setting yourself up for success, and at the same time, especially with parenting, there's the reality that whether it's your first one, your second one, or your third one, that you're not going to be ready for that evolution. And so, how much are you going to let all the ducks needing to be in a row be your excuse for not actually adding another life to your love and to your family?
What was the decision to have the third? This was you were in a different state when you made this decision. So how was that decision made, and how'd that go?
I mean, a big factor of that was that my ex always wanted to have a little girl, and the first two were boys. And so that was always part of the conversation. She was never disappointed that she didn't have a girl or anything like that. She just always, since she was young and when we were married, is, I really want to have a girl to have that relationship. She had a really close, and still does to this day, relationship with her mom, and so she wanted to experience that as a mom, and so that was definitely a big factor of the conversation. And it reached a point that, I don't think there was any one conversation that was like, okay, today's the day, let's start trying type thing. It was more of an evolution. And I knew that was really deep in her heart. And there was probably a few weak moments when both of us were naked and about to have sex where it was like, hey, do you want to make a baby? There could have been that as well. But yeah, we definitely lived our lives partially from a place of passion and love, and also a willingness to take risks for things that we believed in and didn't need to have all of the details sorted out to take that leap. And whether that be moving across the country with small kids or having another kid in the midst of something that may not seem to make sense practically, we just kind of held each other's hands and took the jump and figured it out. And they're happy and healthy and all still with us. So I'm glad that we did.
It's sort of this combination of like reckless abandon and faith, like some combination.
Yeah.
Surrendered faith.
Yeah. Both of us were in our kind of spiritual journey. We relied heavily on God to show up for us in certain ways, not sit on the couch and wait for a truckload of money to show up. But a lot of those decisions were us praying together and really feeling that it's right. And at least for me, there was normally when, it says in the Bible that God gives you a peace that surpasses all understanding. And we relied heavily on that in the sense of normally I would feel this sense of fear or butterflies in my stomach, but also at the same time, this sense of excitement and peace. And if those two are together, that wasn't the deciding factor, but I learned to trust that level of intuition where it's like, man, this is deep, deep, deep down inside. I know this is the right thing to do. And I feel scared and I feel really excited. And so in that concoction of emotions and trust and faith, I feel alive in that. And so we're going to lean into that and pursue that as we go.
And then the work you were doing, becoming a man, masculinity, how did that affect your parenting?
Gosh, it still to this day affects my parenting. You were on my podcast and some of the things that you said challenged my parenting. And my oldest son is turning 16 next month. So like I said, it's an ever evolving journey. And as they go through different stages, it brings up different things. And so, but as far as the podcast is concerned, it was twofold. One is, especially when I got started, I actually didn't have many guests. It was more of a solo podcast. And I was in this place of one, being challenged and learning about masculinity. Well, let's call it healthy masculinity. I was born a man and I've always been a man. So I had masculinity. It just wasn't as refined and maybe had some rough edges to it. But as I was learning more about myself and what masculinity looks like in a healthier way in that, it helped solidify in me these things that I was walking out by talking about them. Like I said, I'm a verbal processor. And for me, I was told since I was 15 years old, I worked at a Wendy's drive-thru. And this is, back a while ago before all of this was available. And there was a gal that came through the drive-thru, got to the window and said, my gosh, you have a radio voice. You should get into radio. I was 15 at the time, right? And I'm just kind of like, okay, that's great. But I had heard there was something to my voice for years. And so little nuggets that, God or the universe drops along the way in something that is a deep-seated, maybe even underdeveloped passion or becomes a passion was there. And then also, like I said, me being a part of this men's group, meeting with my coach, being involved within our church community, there was just so much. There were challenging things that were coming up, but then there was also, oh my gosh, I've never thought about, closing my eyes, putting my hand on my heart and connecting to my heart, connecting to my inner child. Like doing these things, I just felt like this overwhelming, more people need to know about this. And so that really was, it was actually a client of mine that said, "Hey, I want to help you launch a podcast because what you're doing with me is helping me so much that I think you're going to be able to help other people as well." And so the podcast has always been an extension of that, of hopefully the mistakes that I make, the lessons I learn, and now the guests that I have, people are learning from that and learning maybe not a perfect way, or even, what works for me may not work for you, but learning how to navigate their inner world as well as their exterior world in a way that is more fulfilling and they feel more alive in that. And then as I learn from other individuals, I still am part of a men's group, and I'm still, doing things to learn and grow and evolve. And again, as a verbal processor, it's just different for some people. Some people need to go take a walk in the woods and get in their head and really diagnose what's going on. For me, there's often things that I get a nugget of something in a conversation, and then I'll grab that nugget and really unpack that in a podcast episode, be that with a guest or be that in a solo episode. And me talking through that concept, I better understand it for myself. So I'm able to better internalize that for myself and make it a part of my paradigm. And then by extension, people that are listening are giving me feedback that they're also gaining some insights as well.
Mhm. You said you've been coaching for 11 years?
Yes, almost 12. Not
Has that been
consistently. I definitely stopped for a few years through the divorce because I felt like a fraud. Like, how can I help people when my marriage is falling apart? But yes, I've been in this path for almost 20, but an actual coaching practice for, about a dozen years.
And is that your primary source of income now?
That and the podcast. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
the 2
my
together.
bread and butter.
That's great. It's pretty hard to do.
Yeah,
I dabbled in coaching, and it's a tough business
it
model.
is.
You've been doing it longer than most. A lot of people I know have tried it. They've done it for a couple of years. Like me, I did it for a few years, but it's like a career for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, yes, technically that would be the word to use, but for me, it's more a passion. What do they
Yeah.
say? That find what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. Even though, I mean, I don't enjoy emails and have to send emails, but like, it's still bizarre to be able to help people and be in different rooms and situations and facilitate things. Like, to me, I'm just like, this is the life.
Yeah. And so then, you had this third kid. When did the marriage start to decline, or, tell me the story of how that ended up ending in divorce?
Yeah, I don't want to talk about that. No, I'm joking.
Or you don't.
I told you before we started. No, I'm joking. Um, no. So really what it was, we had, like I said, it was messy and we had our challenges and all of that. We also, even within the vein of learning more about ourselves, there were still a lot of unresolved things that we began getting really good at basically using personal development or emotional intelligence language to fight with. And so it didn't actually change the core of the disconnect between us. It just morphed the language from name calling, I don't know, you're being mean. I'm just making this up, but you're being mean right now, to you're disassociating from your heart. Like, it just kind of morphed, right? Because the core of the disconnect wasn't really addressed. And then when we moved from California to Texas, we actually moved to be a part of a group that launched a church in Austin, Texas, that's still going today. But the trade-off with that was, and the challenge, like you said, with coaching, is that most of my coaching was an in-person practice. And the pandemic hadn't happened, so Zoom wasn't a normal thing, or you just, like, technology, it was there, but it wasn't a super common thing. There was still Skype, that kind of stuff. And so when we moved here in 2017 to do that, then all of a sudden a big chunk of my coaching business declined. So there was another layer of, like, financial pressure, on top of a massive transition, on top of small kids, and it was really kind of a pressure cooker in our dysfunction. And then I think it's super important to work on yourself, to be a better version of yourself within your marriage. I mean, my current wife and I still do that, and we're not a part of, all groups together all the time. But we kind of tipped into this place of, in order to improve the marriage, we need to improve ourselves. But the way that we took that, or the way that we kind of ran with that, looking back in hindsight, obviously, is, well, the driving force of our marriage is not our connection, but it's us working on us individually. And it just began to drive a wedge further and further apart from one another. And then in that division, then there was more, hurt. There were things that happened behind one another's backs on both sides of the fence. And over time, it's kind of like a rubber band. There was more and more distance, and you stretch that rubber band, unless you're willing to let the tension off of that and you keep going, eventually that rubber band's going to snap.
Of course, everything happens just as it's supposed to, right? But, if you could change something, do something differently with her, with that relationship, what did you take away as the thing to learn?
We could have an entire episode on that one question right there. I think if I were to distill it down into a primary thing, it would be that I would have stopped my ego from getting in the way. That probably more than anything did more damage within the marriage, as well as, through the transition of divorce. And, I could, even in my own victim-y way, blame her for X or blame her for Y. But really what it was is that I was hurt, and my ego was like, I need to do what I need to do for me. I need to self-protect. And she was doing the same thing. Right. And so in hindsight, it would have been to really focus on not what do I need to learn? What do I need to do to learn how to be less reactionary, and to really address the areas that my ego is hurt or offended, and I'm letting pride be the lens in which I respond instead of humility and love.
Yeah, thanks. How old were the kids?
When they were during the divorce, let's see, they would have been 4, almost 5, 7, and 8, 7 and 9.
How'd they take it?
I mean, their world fell apart, right? I think kids can feel an environment and that things aren't going well, etc. But they also, that is their norm. Whatever their norm is their norm. And they, when we sat them down and shared, it was devastating. And that's actually another thing that I would say, probably when it comes to divorce, is that I want to add to what I said with the ego, is that I was letting my pain block my ability to look long term. And like you said, everything happens for a reason. I'm remarried. She's in another relationship. We're co-parenting. We're friends, and we love one another. But it was really, we were in this tit for tat and not thinking about the long-term implications, both for our kids as well as for ourselves. And, at those ages, them finding out that mommy and daddy are no longer going to be living in the same house, and having to explain that to them, and then, see the looks on their faces, see their tears, all of that. It was towards the top of the list of some of the hardest things that is part of the reality of divorce.
Yeah, what did you guys try before that?
I mean, we tried a lot of things. We're both very stubborn and strong-willed, which can be a benefit when it comes to launching a business, or to pushing through when it comes to podcasting or coaching, whatever it may be. It can be a detriment in a relationship, though. And so, but I mean, we met with a couple different counselors that we had trusted, both in person and then also, back in California, some folks that we knew. We did separate for a short period of time. It wasn't a long period of time, but we did separate. And it was, unfortunately, it was just in a position where the momentum was going in the wrong direction. And as we were trying those things, what was happening within those attempts, we didn't have the right tools. We had the tools for self-development, for working on ourselves, but we really didn't have the tools for reconnection. And so even when we were working through things, as hard conversations came up and as pain was caused, we just didn't know how to get back to one another. We were both in this self-protective reactionary state. And so even though, we did marriage seminars, we did counseling, we were, like I said, working on ourselves, like meeting with coaches individually. But I think a fair chunk of that just kind of turns into a bitching session about the other person instead of your radical ownership of your own process. And so you feel more validated in your stance. And so you anchor in, and then they anchor in, and they're like, oh, well, I met with coach so and so, and they said this is a valid boundary, or what, like I said, just emotionally intelligent arguing with one another, but not actually connecting with one another.
Do you have a sense that it was like sort of a fundamental mismatch from the beginning and was never going to work? Or just that you guys really just didn't have the skills, and maybe if you'd met again today, it would have been a different story?
No, I personally think it was we didn't have the skills. The way that I describe it is like, would you rather live in Alaska or in Florida? Like right now in my marriage, I have challenges. That's living in Florida. And my ex-wife is living in Alaska, and there's challenges living there. There's amazing beauty in the mountains, etc. And there's the ocean and the beach in Florida. But both of them have trade-offs, and both of them have trauma and challenges and things like that. And the interesting thing is with my ex, since the divorce, we both around the divorce time found plant medicine for the first time and started exploring with that. And she does coaching now, and I do coaching now. And I actually think that we could have been a dynamic couple if we were able to get through the pressure cooker of the child rearing and the finances, etc., while maintaining connection. And we just did not maintain connection. And I think it's really easy to look back on our relationship with rose-colored glasses and think of like only the good aspects of her or of us, and maybe not the reality of it. But I personally don't believe that it's not inevitable for everyone, and there are obviously really, really unhealthy relationships that you should get out of. But I think there is a large percentage of divorces that, especially after the first, let's say, 5 or 6 years of having kids, where your norm is just put in a blender and pressed on high. And there's lack of sleep. There's even the woman getting pregnant and creating a life, and then breastfeeding and the hormonal changes that she's going through. And then if you don't know how to really nurture that side of her, and you're in your own reactionary state, and then there's the financial reality of adding kids to your life. And like, it is an intense period of time that is a trial per se, that I personally think there is a percentage of marriages that, if they're willing to double and triple down on fighting for connection, working on themselves, yes, but also being willing to fight for connection through those challenges, that's what old love is made of, is when you can look back on those times and go, wow, do you remember when we almost got a divorce, or we hated each other, or this was going on? But they were willing to work through that. Again, there are some times where there's just a fundamental mismatch, or there's an abusive relationship. Like, I'm not saying that everyone should just write it out and just put up with any relationship. But at least for me and my ex, I just believe that a combination of our stubbornness and our ego, and then also a lack of tools to know how to get through that fire. And instead of learning how to hold hands and walk through the fire, we let go of each other's hands and ran to the water and our each perspective sides.
Yeah. Yeah, it's refreshing to hear you take a lot of responsibility there. A lot of people either blame the other or just say we were never meant to be or whatever.
Yeah.
And, definitely with me and Serenity, been through all kinds of challenges, everything from the normal challenges to starting a business to having a baby and with the products launching on the same day as the baby was born, and all the stress of those things. Health, she's always had health issues, so always, dealing with health stuff on top of the stress of the baby. And we're older parents, we're in our 40s, so everything's just a little bit harder. And man, our relationship coach has been the key
Yeah.
to our success. Like, we could never have done it alone. Like, there are several moments that we wouldn't have made it through without him helping us gain the tools, as you say, gain the perspective, let's get beyond our egos. Even a time fairly recently where I really had to make a choice about whether how surrendered I was willing to be, and commit to that. And my parents committed, and they had a fairly destructive relationship that really was not only that I don't know if they were fundamental mismatch or they really didn't have the tools, but it was very unhealthy for both of them. They stayed in way longer than they should have. So I have this kind of like trauma around that,
Yeah.
and tended to do that in relationships would stay longer than it was healthy. So I have that sense, like whenever I just think about life without serenity, it's like there's almost nothing that I wouldn't change or do to like keep her in my life. Like there's nothing, no freedom or nice things that I could have without her that aren't tenfold better with her.
Yeah.
So it's just, yeah, whatever the challenges are, there's so much good.
And that shows a maturity in you that I just didn't have in my mid-30s, that it was more so, like I said, my dad, and this is on me that I chose to accept it, but my dad modeled essentially being a victim, and blaming external circumstances or my mom or whatever. And I adopted that. And so then when things were hard, I wasn't seeing, well, I can't imagine doing this without my ex. I was seeing, I can't believe she's doing this to me, right? Or I can't believe she's choosing this or not choosing this or not hearing me or whatever it may be. So then it gets me anchored in even more on my side of the fence, pointing the finger, right? And then out of that, I jump at her and then she gets hurt. And then, and then so on and so on.
And now you're feeling your feelings more than you ever have in your life, and so you're hurt more, you're more angry, you're more
Exactly.
so it's like this interesting combination of, like, you open the floodgates, and then she's there to trigger you all day long.
Yes.
It's almost like the relationship couldn't survive that transition.
Yes. Yeah,
It was just the
absolutely.
casualty of that.
But I don't
Yeah,
think it's an impossibility. I think we could have. We didn't, so maybe we couldn't have. But
yeah.
I think that if we both, again, chose one another through that, that we could have found a way through it. But we were unwilling to do that, unfortunately.
Yeah. And so how have you mitigated the impact on the kids? Like, obviously, it was super devastating for them.
Yeah.
How have you tried to help them with through it?
I remember shortly after the divorce, but the first probably 6 months after the divorce, I'm still hurt, right? I'm still hurt about the fact that this didn't work out. I'm still hurt by things that she said or did, and she's still whatever. And in that, it's so tempting to vent that to the kids in a way. And I remember shortly after the divorce, my mom, she modeled this first and foremost, most of my adult life. But my mom told me, she's like, Josh, you can do whatever you want. But I chose when I divorced your dad, that, and she had some very valid reasons, very valid. But she said, I chose to give you boys a gift of refusing to talk bad about your dad, no matter what you guys said or what he said. I wanted you to have your own relationship with him, and whatever, if he could be a great dad for you, or if he wasn't, or whatever that was, I didn't want to influence it in one way or the other. And I remember taking that from my mom, and I'm sure there were a few times that I slipped up and said something under my breath or, passive aggressively towards my kids. Because then, all of a sudden we go from living together, because now we have 50-50 custody. They get in the car and then they're like, oh, well, mom told us this, or we did this with mom, or whatever, that kind of stuff. And you want to just fire back. Right. But I remember that, that wisdom that my mom gave me, and then also resting and understanding that my ex was in a lot of pain. She was hurt, but she loves my kids. She loves them deeply and dearly, and she is a good mom to the degree that she can be. And even when she would say or do things, or like I would hear through the kids say or do things, then I would default to, I'm sure she was well intended when she said that, or like give her the benefit of the doubt. And fortunately, I mean, it's beyond my control, but she always reciprocated that in the sense of, or not, maybe not always, especially like I said, in the beginning of the divorce, but uh, more times than not, and as kind of a theme with the kids, that she is defaulting to, I am a good dad and I'm a good man, that, and kind of falling back on that, and then me doing that with her. I think that even though divorce is painful, especially for the kids, it's not what was intended for us, I believe. But given that, my kids are super resilient. And part of that resilience comes from not being stuck in the middle of our pain with one another and both of us choosing to love our kids by not tainting the relationship that they have with the other
Mhm.
parent. And by doing that, they're able to feel themselves and feel loved with me and then also with their mom. And so certain things have changed and certain things are harder than they would be otherwise. But at their core, they feel loved both from mom and dad. And there's not one of us that's making the other one a bad guy and getting them stuck in the middle. I just think that does so much damage to the kids beyond the pain that they experience from us choosing to no longer be together.
Yeah. Did you get them professional help as well, like some kind of therapy or
We've always
counseling?
been open to it if they wanted it. And we almost jokingly say that, well, I jokingly say, I think she does as well, that they're going to need it at some point and we'll be happy to help pay for it. Um, but they haven't been open to it or curious about it to a degree. And then also for me, even before we were divorced, I've always had a cornerstone of, and probably the pendulum swing, right? Because my dad emotionally was not there for me, that almost to an unhealthy degree sometimes where it's hard for me to choose to work because I feel like I'm losing out on relationship, and there's some balance within all of that and a healthy medium or middle ground there. But I have fought for connection with my kids, since they were super young. And so not perfect. And I know there's certain things that they can't hear from mom or dad. They need to hear from someone else, but oftentimes they would come to me or to their mom and need to process things. And, we've navigated some really hard things. And in a sense, I'm not saying I can replace a counselor. Like I said, I think that there's a point where they're probably going to need that. But even just saying, whenever that may be for you, whenever you feel that you want to go to counseling, if anything comes up that you feel that you need to talk to about me, I just want you to know I'm here to talk to you about it. I I am not gonna justify or defend
Mm.
my stance. What you experience is what you experienced, and that's valid. And just affirming the reality of what they've had to walk through. Not done it perfect every time, but at its core, made myself available for those conversations. And now, not every time, but often we're navigating those hard emotions, and they may or may not choose to pursue that later on in life. I think there is actually there's a percentage of dysfunction that comes from over counseling, in my opinion, especially with kids, where I think it's really easy for them to mislabel themselves with things where they're still learning, you know, grandma's gonna die, their dog's gonna die. An extreme one, we go through a divorce. They're gonna go through hard times, but I don't personally believe that the knee jerk reaction needs to be that they have to go deep within to just sit there and talk about it over and over again, because I've seen that in other kids lead to a sense of narcissism where the world revolves around them, because if they have any kind of negative experience or emotion, then it's the end of the world for them. Instead of building some resiliency, I'm not saying we got a divorce to build resiliency in the kids, but building a resiliency through understanding there's going to be pain and there's going to be hardships, and that
Yeah.
mom and dad are there for them and love them deeply and are willing to talk and navigate through that, but that they don't need to now go meet with a counselor every week for 3 years to talk about the grief and the pain over and over and over and over and over and over again. Does that make sense?
I guess so. I guess divorce is a traumatic event.
Yeah.
There's trauma. And so there's trauma like anything can be treated. There's a professional treatment for it. It doesn't mean that you're in therapy forever, but that there is like a treatment, like you break your arm and you go get your cast and then it heals. And so I would think of the divorce being like that, like at least situationally
Yeah.
kind of insisting on professional help to navigate through that was sort of I would imagine would be best. It sounds like you kind of offered it, but they said no.
Yeah, because I personally have seen if I force them to meet with someone, they're not going to go into it with an openness versus if I build a relationship with them where they can come to me when they're ready and I'm available for that, then they have more of an openness and a willingness to navigate the emotions versus trying to appease mom or dad's demand to talk about emotions that I'm not ready to talk about.
Yeah. I guess there's a line between forcing them and like strongly recommend, like I think it would be really good for you to try this out
Sure.
versus like, this is here if you want to let me know,
Sure,
like kind of
yeah.
a thing. Otherwise, come to me. So that's interesting. That's the route you chose. And then how long before you got remarried or started dating Kristen again? Like when did that?
For me, it was I didn't date anyone else for about 2 years. Really spent a lot of time kinda rebuilding my inner world and my life in a lot of ways because, like I said, I met my ex in Africa, and so there was a deep spiritual component to it. There was my marriage, we were a part of the church, so the divorce, I lost a lot of my version of my God, and I lost my wife, and I lost a lot of my community within all of that, and that was one of many ingredients that ended up with.
You chose to leave or you weren't welcome
It
anymore or like
wasn't that
what
I
happened?
wasn't welcome anymore, it was that we were close to the leadership, and in my opinion, they didn't really know how to respond to it, and so they just withdrew relationally. So, like, there was quite literally about a 4 to 6 month period where I didn't get a text or a call or anything from anyone. So, it
How
wasn't like
sad.
you're no longer welcome here. We could go there and they could do the Sunday morning, "It's so good to see you. When are we gonna have coffee?" obligatory hi. But relationally, we went from regularly communicating and having dinners together to then no longer communicating type thing.
Wow.
Yeah.
They just shut down. They just couldn't
Yeah.
face it.
Yeah. Exactly. So
So you're dealing with that for 2 years, you wait to start dating.
yeah. Well, not intentionally. I told myself at least a year was what I waited for, but then after that year, I wasn't really in a hurry. I was like, I don't wanna rush into something else. I wanna continue this path of learning more about who I am, and discovering kinda those deeper layers of masculinity per se, and that was really kinda when I started to explore plant medicine, sitting with ayahuasca and psilocybin, etcetera, and that was peeling back even more layers, right? So yeah, then it was after about 2 years, I was going to a yoga studio in Buda, Texas, and Kristen was going there as well, and we just kinda kicked it off and started as a friendship for the first few months, and then kinda as things progress, they did, and we ended up getting married, and we still are now. We're coming up on 3 years.
She was kinda your first real relationship
Since the
after
divorce,
the
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I went from high school stupidity to then Marine Corps stupidity relationally. Like I never had a girlfriend for more than 2 or 3 months type thing to then going to getting out of the Marines, wanting to start kind of a deep spiritual quest. And so I wanted kind of nothing to do with women was my thing was like internally, I'm like, well, women are going to be a distraction from me trying to figure out this relationship with God. So I don't want to date because I've been doing it wrong, in my opinion,
Mhm.
and not going deep with anyone. And then I met my ex in Africa, and that started as also a friendship because I was like, I'm not here to date. And then when we got back to the States is then when that we kind of met up and we're like, hey, there's a lot of commonality and cross pollination and some spirituality within all of that. And then it kind of blossomed from there. So both times that I met my wife and now my ex wife, I was in a position that I was not on the hunt for a wife. I was on the hunt for living my life or leaning into a relationship with God. And I think there's maybe something there for some folks that feel like every date they have to ask themselves, is this the wife or not the wife? If you lean into life and begin to live at its fullest, that normally that partner that aligns with that version of you will come into your life.
And then when you started dating her, how long before you introduced her to your kids or you to her kids?
Well, that was what was interesting because there was some a family acro yoga that her kids were there, my kids were there. So like they had met each other but didn't know that we were kind of dating, etc. We were talking for probably I want to say it was 3 or 4 months before we kind of started doing different things. Like we went camping, but it was a group of it was her and like 3 other families that we went camping with, and so it wasn't kind of this hard line in the sand. And then my kids, being super intuitive and in tune, were kind of like, I think Kristen really likes you. I'm like, what? Okay, sure. I kind of like her too. She's cool. And
Before you were dating, your kids were like, I'm
yeah.
pretty sure y'all are more than friends. And you're like, nah.
Well, I'm normally oblivious to a lot of that, and so apparently she was, beginning to like me more than just a friend, and the kids were picking up on it and then telling me about it, and so yeah.
Kids.
Yeah.
And how'd they feel about that?
I mean, they were open to it, and it was weird for them at the same time because ever since the divorce, I had not been dating around, and so they didn't know me to be anyone other than just like the available dad 24/7, or like when I had them, because there wasn't another relationship that I was fielding or leaning into. So that was a little bit different, and but we talked about it, and like I said, we had done a handful of different things kind of like in group dynamics with families and things like that. And so they kind of got to know her by proxy. And so it wasn't just like, hey, out of nowhere, I'd like to introduce you to your new
My
stepmom.
girlfriend.
Like, yeah.
Yeah. Had your ex-wife, been dating or remarried or anything?
Not she's still not been remarried so far, but yeah, she started dating shortly after the divorce, and so the kids had experienced kind of that dynamic with her.
And how did Kristen's kids react to you?
I mean, they were even younger. So right now they're 7 and 10. So they were 3.5, and whatever that math is, 3.5 and 6 or 5, something
6.
like that.
Yeah.
And so it was just kind of like, okay, he seems fun. He's silly. He's goofy. He'll roll on the ground with me. It wasn't kind of, they didn't really understand emotionally fully what was transpiring, I think.
Yeah. And she'd been divorced, what, about a year?
A little bit less than that. Yeah.
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 Yeah. So did you perceive any kind of trauma or wounds her girls were still carrying from that?
Definitely with her older. It's really interesting, both with her younger as well as my daughter. They were younger when the divorce happened. And so it's really been, I mean, even for my daughter in the last, I don't know, the last year or two, she just turned 10 last week, that there's more kind of like emoting and bubbling up related to the divorce, because they just don't really have the words for it necessarily and can't really fully articulate it and have those conversations. And so, I don't necessarily think there was things related to her divorce that they were navigating. It was more so, I would say, there were some really unique dynamic challenges in the blending of the two families.
Mhm. Yeah.
More so that than, and I just didn't have the relationship with them even to process some of those things as well.
Yeah. And so when did you so I assume that you sort of identify as dad to them and Kristen another mom to your kids. When did that kind of start happening? Or maybe at least on your side, when did you start to really feel like you were a father figure to them?
This is going to sound weird, but there was a moment. So it's been an evolution. I'll say that. I don't think there was a moment, but there was a moment when even before we started dating, it was when there was a group of families that were going camping together, and Kristen and her girls, and then me and my kids were the first two to show up. So we were just setting up the tent, and they were running around, and my daughter was off playing with her girls, and I remember just standing there like, wow, this, like, again, we were not dating, it wasn't even on my radar, any of that. And it was like, kind of feels like family. Like, she's mom, I'm dad. We're all kind of getting along, and the kids are off doing their thing. Like, it like threw me off, to feel that, because we hadn't talked about it or anything.
A little foreshadow
Yeah,
feeling that
exactly.
you saw the potential. Yeah.
Exactly. Um, And so it was really kind of, we live on 6.5 acres down in San Marcos. And it was when we bought this place together and moved in. But before that, it was touch and go, right? Sometimes we began doing things together like all 7 of us, but I was still, as far as being dad to her girls, I was still someone she was dating, so it didn't really resonate, that role necessarily until we moved in together. And I would say probably the first 6 to 9 months, there were aspects that they got along, and I mean, they even to this day, they have sibling tiffs and things like that, but some very distinct challenges in the blending process of just, like, her girls acclimating to what my boundaries are or rules are for this home that we live in versus the home that she goes to with her dad, and then vice versa with my kids going to their mom and then coming here, and Kristen's rules that she may have that are a little bit different. At their core, there's a lot of cross pollination and similarities between all their homes, but the having all of us under one roof, we have 50-50 custody with our exes, and we have the same schedule for the most part. And so we oscillate between all 5 kids and then no kids, which has its pros and cons. But when all of them are here, especially in the beginning, they were used to, let's use my kids as an example. They were used to being at my ex's house that had kind of certain rules, and then being at my house that had certain rules. And now there are certain things that I would be okay with that Kristen would not be okay with, but because we're married, I've adapted to those things, and she's adapted to things as well, right? So there's like this new set of rules that's forming,
What's like is there an example of one of those that she wanted that you didn't, or
so I'll give you an example. So that the house that I lived in after the divorce, it had hardwood downstairs, and then carpeted stairs, and then carpet upstairs. One of those houses, and I didn't care if the kids had their shoes on downstairs; they could run around, whatever. The rule was no shoes upstairs, right? But not no shoes in the house for any reason whatsoever. And then also have inside shoes versus outside shoes. It was just like not a big deal because I would just sweep and then mop the floor downstairs, and there was no shoes upstairs. So then we got married and moved into this house together. And Kristen grew up where her mom, like, clean carpets was one of her top 4 things in her home type thing. And then by proxy, she's kind of adopted that. And so if you there's literally, like, you come in our door and there is a little, I don't know, 4 or 5 foot section that shoes can be in, and beyond that, that's a problem
right?
if the shoes are
Got
on.
it.
And the kid and my kids were just oblivious to that, so they would come and they would run in, and then Kristen's like, What's going on here? Like, why can you take the shoes off?" Or then
Yeah.
not even necessarily to my kids that, but then we would have conversations where she's like, your kids are wearing shoes again." And so it just like that, there were lots of
Little
those little
symbolic.
things.
Yeah, it's a great example of like it's a small thing but very disruptive to to remember every time, and so
Exactly.
little stuff like that. And so do Kristen's girls call you dad?
Not often. They've done it a few times, but more times than not, it's just Josh, and then my kids call Kristen.
Yeah.
There
So they
there
haven't
are
called.
these little sweet moments, like Juniper, who is our youngest. She has probably said it to me more,
Yeah.
or sometimes she'll do a drawing, like a stick figure drawing of the family, and she'll put mom and dad, me for dad, that kind. So like it's there.
Is that special that you have feelings about that when
Yeah,
she
I
does?
do. Every time that either one of them call me dad. But then I also, I think that what's given them permission to do that to a degree, because I definitely felt this from her oldest, was that, she still has a dad, right? And will always have a dad. And so then, like, the first time that happened, I'm like, "Oh, thank you so much." And I just want you to know, I will never replace your dad. Your dad will always be your dad. Like, thank you. That feels so sweet to me. But you still have your dad too. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And I think that sometimes kids in that dynamic, they kind of get stuck in, like, okay, I've got a dad and stepdad. Like, what do I do here? I feel like he's a dad, but I don't want to call him dad because I've got a dad. So just like speaking to that confusion, in a sense, can give permission to then just let that be.
Have you ever talked about titles at all or requested it be a
No,
title or
I've never requested. I want them to use whatever form. I've never been big on titles ever in my life, in any capacity, in any business. I mean, I've been a part of businesses where they're like, "You need a title." I'm like, "I don't just give me one. It's gonna be on the bottom of my email signature. Great. Okay, let's move on." So, probably more than others, I don't care. I care more about the relationship I have with them than the title they give me.
Yeah. Other tips for stepdads? The ways to be a great stepdad?
Well, I think that if you're a new stepdad, is understanding that blending process is gonna take time, and to it sounds cliche, but, put yourself in their shoes in the sense of what they're having to navigate new norms, having to navigate new standards, having to navigate new relationships. That can be a lot for kids. And so just not having this expectation of a black and white, my house, my rules, type thing, and be more aware of that and then willing to fight for connection with them, which may actually be harder and is harder than with your own kids. If you have kids, or if you've never had kids and you're marrying in and now you have kids, right? It's that relationship was not formed from day one. That relationship is formed from year 2, year 7, year whatever it is that you're coming into their life. And so you need to be okay with them not trusting you sometimes, them challenging you sometimes, and understand, now we're 3 years into it, that, especially like Juniper, she's a wild child. Like I love her, and she can, especially with Kristen, push her buttons more than I think just about any kid that we have. And but understand that they're going to test that sometimes. And how you respond to that either builds trust with them, or sets a standard for them, or creates this, oh, well, you're not my dad reaction. Right. And so, as an example with Junie, when she would be really defiant, I could be like, rah, 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 rah. But instead, I literally walk over to her. I squat down so that I'm eye to eye with her. She's on my level. I may talk firm sometimes, like, hey, we are not allowed to do that in this house. Like, but I'm not yelling. I'm actually
Mhm.
dropping my voice. I'm making connection with this new standard that they're having to live with, and may have to do that. I have probably done that with that girl, I don't know, 50 to 100 times, right? It's
Yeah.
it's not a
A
light
day.
switch. But just be willing to go through that. Like, you're choosing that relationship, and if kids are a part of that dynamic, you're choosing all of them in your choice to say yes to that woman or that man.
Mhm. Yeah, I like how you've talked that you let them lead. You let them decide what to call you, you let them determine their level of trust and intimacy. If you need to set a boundary or talk to them, you do it respectfully as a peer, not as a necessarily like there is some authority to the way you said it, but it's not like I have ultimate control over you, which I don't think parents should do that anyway, but especially when you're still building that, that's have they said that you're not my dad thing? Have they use that one on
I've
you?
never heard that from them, no.
I think that's like it's a big success for you. Like to me, that comes out from a place of you now I'm feeling controlled by you and I need to assert that you can't control me. So it sounds like if they've never used that one, have they said to Kristen, have you heard your kids say it to her?
Not one that was explosive enough for me to recall in this moment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's cool. Yeah. That's sort of like a quintessential like moment with
It's
step
like the
parents, I
ultimate
think.
child trump card, right? Like,
Yeah, like you're
I'm
not
feeling
my
trapped, you're not my all right.
yeah, and then like trying to hurt them and so forth.
Yeah.
So yeah. Do you have a relationship with her ex?
I mean, a cordial one. He's more
Yeah.
introverted. So, fortunately, my ex and Kristen do have like a friendly relationship. My ex is just more outgoing than I think that her ex is. And so I mean, we've been friendly, but it's not like we're texting kids' calendar details with one another or anything like that. But neither
She
one of us
still t
are.
so she leads the communication with him, and you lead the communication with
For
your
the most
ex?
part, we do have a group text with my ex and the two of us. We don't have that with her ex,
Okay.
but we've
Whatever
just
works.
learned, they're two different individuals, right? And so we've just learned what works for them, to really respect where they're at and have adapted to that.
Yeah. Kind of to wrap up, on masculinity, boys, you have some
I
boys,
do.
you have
I
girls.
do.
What do you want when you think about intentional, multifaceted masculinity, what do you hope your both boys and girls take away from what it means to be masculine? What is a positive masculinity?
I think for the boys, it is masculinity has depth to it, and to not be afraid to explore the depth of it with me or their friends or anyone. Within that, I mean, there's a huge core value of how you interact with and treat women is a really big deal to me. I mean, there's a few core principles that are almost non-negotiables in the way that they navigate relationships while they're under my roof, in the sense of you're not going to take advantage of or manipulate, or and it's not like in a threatening way. It's like, that's not who you are. You actually have a good heart. You are a compassionate man, that kind of stuff. And then I think the other thing is just a willingness to, which has been a challenge for me, but has also been really healing for me when I've chosen to, is to reach out. And again, it doesn't always have to be to me, but they have, by what I have modeled to them, we've talked about the fact that they have friends that have reached out to them saying, "Hey, I'm feeling suicidal," or "I'm going through this hard time." And their friends are doing that because they're modeling that to them, right? And so I think men in general have a harder time than not to ask for help, to choose to be vulnerable with a trusted core, not with everyone, but that it's going to be messy, it's going to be hard, but if you choose to live honestly with yourself and with others, there's a depth there that you should be willing to lean into and explore as you grow older and as you navigate the different stages of life. What I want my boys to learn about masculinity is that they don't need to be afraid of the fact that there's a lot of depth to masculinity, and they can spend a lifetime exploring what that is by choosing to be vulnerable and raw and real with a select few, as well as at the same time set standards for themselves that may be counterintuitive to what culture is telling them, the way that they treat themselves, as well as the way that they treat others, especially the way that they protect, guard, and defend women. Yeah, and what I want my girls to learn is that it's okay to have standards to set in what they look for in men, and that they shouldn't be a doormat, or they shouldn't lower their expectations or their standards, and they should understand that they're uniquely beautiful and powerful in their own way, and to not settle for less than what they deserve, be that in relationship or in anything else that they do, to understand that they are more than capable, and oftentimes their intuition is leading the way within a relationship, within a man and woman relationship, to begin to trust that intuition and follow it as they move through life.
Yeah, that's so nice. I think women are really not taught to trust their
Yep.
intuition. In fact, they're taught the opposite. You're crazy. You don't know what you're talking about. They're gaslit all the time. I never said that. We didn't do that. And that's such a powerful tool that, man, our whole lives would be different if I didn't trust, and Serenity didn't trust her own intuition, like everything with the baby food company, all the way to getting pregnant.
Yep.
It wasn't working. And she's like, I think we need to be married. She had resisted
Oh,
being
okay.
married.
Okay.
I really wanted to be married, but she had been married before and was just like, I'm fine with the baby, but I don't need a wedding. And she's like, we need to be married. And so I planned a wedding, and we got pregnant on the honeymoon.
Okay.
So,
Wow.
let alone all the different pieces of the business that have been decision after decision, her intuition. So that's a really powerful one. And so also modeling for boys too, that like a woman's intuition is, you have your own intuition. I think you said that, like, it's multifaceted, it's deep. Being masculine, there is our own kind of
Yeah.
our own style of intuition that gets also, ignored because it's in the feelings, and we're not taught to feel.
Absolutely.
So we can't feel our bodies, we can't feel our feelings. It's pretty hard to feel the voice of God or that intuition, right? Because it's physical. It's our brain's going to say a bunch of other bullshit.
Yeah. Being a stepdad, it's kind of like being a dad, in the sense of there's really not a lot you can do to anticipate the reality of it. But if you're willing to be present in the process and be okay with the challenge of the transition of stepping into that role, it can be some of the most rewarding things of your life.
It's nice. Awesome. Cool. Well, tell us about your platform. How can people learn about your work, your podcast, your coaching?
Yeah. So I have a podcast, Multifaceted Masculinity. and got, I don't know, it's about 70 episodes up now. And so some really great content, I would say, largely because of the guests that I've been having on lately and looking forward to having on in the near future. And then my coaching, you can just, easiest way is probably through the podcast, fill out the contact form. I've got a funky last name, joshcearbaugh.com, Cearbaugh. So you can go directly to that website and learn about the coaching offers and reach out to me. And then if there's any episode interest that you may have or topics that you would want me or a guest to explore, I'm always open to, if you fill out the form that's on the podcast episode with some content ideas. I love digging into anything related to what healthy masculinity looks like.
That's great. Well, thank you. Really appreciate all the work you're doing with yourself, with men, with your coaching and podcast, as a dad, as a stepdad, making big impact on the world. So appreciate you coming on, sharing with us.
Thanks, Joe.